the last time a president defied a governor and essentially called up the National Guard of that state was to desegregate schools when Southern governors were refusing to follow the federal law of integrating schools in the South. Okay, so this is the last time we've seen a president do this to a governor.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today we've had Chuck Todd on the program. He's the host of the Chuck Toddcast and a former MSNBC moderator. We speak to him about what's happening in Los Angeles. We're on day 4 of these protests against immigration raids. We saw Donald Trump deploy these National Guards against Gavin, Newsom, his wishes, and what that means to have these two beefing, and the fact that this was a pretty unprecedented move from Donald Trump to go above the governor of the state. We also speak to him about the breakup of Elon Musk and Donald Trump and get his thoughts on that. He has an interesting interpretation of what he thinks went on behind closed doors. So all that today on the Trump Report. You can watch us every day, Monday through Friday, on Times Radio's YouTube. Or if you don't have time to watch YouTube anymore, you can stream us as a podcast anywhere you get your podcast. So that's now out there for anyone who enjoys watching the Trump Report every day. Chuck Todd, host of the Chuck Toddcast, and of course former MSNBC host and moderator. Thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Happy to do so, Maddie.
We should kick off, Chuck, with what's happening in Los Angeles. We're on day 4 of these protests against Trump's immigration raids. We've seen nearly 60 people have been arrested in the city, 4,000 National Guards now deployed, and around 700 Marines. Look, the situation looks to have intensified, but do you think it's accurate to say that the LAPD could have handled this situation on their own without troops?
Certainly appears that we didn't even give it a chance for them to do so, and they are a very large force, and they deal with protests quite a bit. This is not, there's 3 or 4 cities in our country that all regularly deal with protesters: New York, Washington, LA, and you might throw in a Chicago or a San Francisco, but this is a major police force. There's no reason to believe that they couldn't get everything under control as soon. It's notable to me that the president's chief advisor on this, Tom Homan, has said he hasn't found anybody that's broken the law, at least among the public servant side of things. So even though he's held that over the head of the governor or the mayor or anybody that gets in their way, in some ways that's a tacit acknowledgement that local law enforcement was cooperating.
And it kind of contradicts everything the Republican Party have been saying for years, especially since 2020 with the Black Lives Matter riots, that how important police are, how important it is with the work they do, the faith we put into them. So I don't understand how within just a couple of days you would revoke the police and bring in such a bizarre situation as bringing in National Guards.
Well, and what's interesting is he's called up these National Guard, but they don't really have a mission yet. They haven't done anything. Really, the point appears to simply be the presence. That's also true for the Marines. I mean, the Marines couldn't engage unless the president invoked the Insurrection Act. And, there's a small cynical part of my brain, and certainly a lot of people that are concerned that this administration's looking for an excuse to invoke the Insurrection Act.
And for our listeners and viewers, this obviously all comes because the Trump administration ordered these ICE raids on undocumented migrants, which resulted in over 2,000 arrests in just 2 days, and some have already been deported. And this is a huge increase from, I think the average is around 600 daily arrests, which was happening since Trump was sworn in. But Chuck, when we saw the Latino community really come out in droves to vote for the US president in the 2024 election, how do you think this situation will affect this Latino voter base that he had just gotten on his side?
Well, that's interesting. And you have to look at it community by community. I mean, one of the mistakes that I think the Democratic Party made was assuming that the Latino population is monolith. Mexican immigrants are different than Venezuelan immigrants, or different than Cuban immigrants. And let me focus and zero in on the Venezuelan immigrants here, because it's from a community that I'm from. It's in Miami. And the Venezuelan community had been very much embraced by the Cuban community, the Cuban exile community, very Republican, very supportive of Donald Trump. And when he took, and the Venezuelan community in Miami has gone right along. And we are seeing there, in my conversations with folks down there, there's a lot of disappointed Venezuelans when the president pulled the temporary protected status. President Biden had given about nationalities from about 5 countries where there is some questionable political situations, whether it's Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, and they got temporary protected status, meaning even if they were found to be here illegally, as long as they hadn't committed a crime, they could stay. Well, that's since been revoked, and the Venezuelan community, some political leaders are, down in South Florida, are protesting this, are upset about it. But I don't think the administration sees this yet. I think they see this as the only issue where a majority of the public is on their side, at least in the goal. I don't think the public's on their side with the tactics, but they are on their side with the goal. And so I don't think that, even though there are certainly cracks in his newly found Latino support with how he's conducted this policy, I don't think it's going to make him change. But I'll tell you this, the real issue here is the president and Stephen Miller has been disappointed in those daily deportation numbers. Now, part of the reason is in the last 6 months of the Biden administration actually picked up on deportations and got rid of what would have been those so-called easiest folks to get rid of out of the country. So one of the reasons the president pulled temporary protected status was to increase the pool of potential deportees.
Wow. And right now, we know that the state of California has now officially sued the Trump administration. They've alleged that Trump violated the Constitution by overriding Governor Gavin Newsom's authority when he sent those National Guards in. Newsom called this an unprecedented power grab and said the Trump administration had overstepped the bounds of laws and are intent on going as far as the use of military in an unlawful way. But Chuck, can you walk me through the beef, the tension happening between these two right now, between Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, and Donald Trump?
Just to put this in perspective, the last time a president defied a governor and essentially called up the National Guard of that state was to desegregate schools, when Southern governors were refusing to follow the federal law of integrating schools in the South. Okay, so this is the last time we've seen a president do this to a governor. So it's just worth pointing that out. Look, in many ways, these two you could, if you put them up and said, they're similar personalities, right? They're big egos. They're certainly very charismatic gentlemen. There's a lot of complicated family history here. Gavin Newsom's first wife was the longtime girlfriend of Donald Trump Jr. Gavin Newsom's first wife is now the ambassador to Greece, appointed by Donald Trump. So this is and I'm sure if you didn't know that, you're like, oh, that's why it feels so personal, right? There is a sense where you could tell that Newsom and Trump, these are guys that know each other, personally have each other's cell phone, and this is like you're really angry at somebody you feel like by a first name basis. You've probably dropped the F-bomb and S-bombs and all those things at them in the past. So no, I think there are people I've talked to in the Republican Party who think this is just on the pure optics. This is such a winner for Trump because Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is seen as on the more liberal side of the Democratic Party, right? California is definitely to the left of mainstream Democrats, and getting in a showdown with the more liberal part of the party, elevating Gavin Newsom as the face of the Democratic Party, many Republicans see that as a good thing.
And Gavin Newsom is not exactly the most popular governor, especially when California's been going through.
No, he's wearing out his welcome. He's at the end of his second term.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then he's already had a recall election, I think, in 2022. And then people wonder if he's meant to be the Democrats' choice for the presidency in 2028. But I don't really see that happening. But what you're saying, Chuck, is Is it very uncommon for a US president to be getting involved in a city protest, even if the core issue of the protests are about a federal crackdown on illegal immigrants?
Maddie, this is the first time I've ever seen a president lean into something like this. Normally, presidents, they've got bigger things to worry about than protests in a city,
Well,
right?
yes,
And they
especially
usually don't
right
want to get
now.
dragged. Right. You usually don't want to get dragged into these situations, but they're not getting dragged in. I'm sorry, I think they manufactured the situation. I mean, all of these immigration raids, Stephen Miller's been involved in directing where they go. They have been definitely, you can feel the political, they've been setting this up. And this is where I've talked to some Democrats who are upset that sort of some progressives stepped into the trap. But they have been trying to bait the left here on this issue because they think the middle is closer to them on this when it comes to immigrants and migrants in this country than they are with the progressive base of the Democratic Party. And they've been selectively trying to do these ICE raids in very blue communities. I live in Northern Virginia. They've been all over there in Washington, D.C. They targeted the restaurants that are all owned by the spouse of a prominent member of the media, right? They've been selectively trying to goad sort of a more cultural left-wing response on this. And so that's why you look at all this and you're like, this is, this feels manufactured. This feels intentional. You don't see these ICE raids happening in Kansas. You don't see them happening in Florida or Texas. It's definitely been selective in places like Chicago, Northern Virginia, New York, and California.
The sanctuary cities. But Gavin Newsom, he sat for an interview with Brian Tyler Cohen, which was a very interesting interview, I have to say. You can tell how pissed off Gavin Newsom is. He said that Donald Trump is unhinged, and he lied when he claimed that he brought up the National Guard over the phone call when the two of them spoke. He said he lied when he told reporters that he had already spoken to Gavin Newsom about that. Newsom said that Trump hardly even wanted to talk about LA, and then he wouldn't tell the audience what Trump wanted to speak about. So, Chuck, do you think this is politically risky for Trump, the way he's been handling this?
Of course I do. And I think everything, this goes back to, and I can tie this with the tariffs as well. You take two goals that are popular with the public: returning manufacturing to the United States, following the law, and limiting the amount of border crossings and that we've had when it comes to migrants and immigration. But there's not a majority for him to suspend habeas corpus. There's not a majority for him to sort of radically change, raise taxes on consumer goods and mess with the economy in order to accelerate. But the president is very impatient. He wants like an immediate reaction. He wants an immediate result, which you can't get. And if you try to force it, in some ways you'll take two steps back. I mean, I'm going to solve Russia and Ukraine war on day one. Look where we are. We're on day 160, right? And then we're probably further away from a truce there than not. And so I do think his tactics have a way of undermining him. He could take a policy that's popular, like his immigration policies, but how he's implementing them will end up. I mean, arguably, this is what happened in the first term. His unpopularity was due to his execution of his policies, not necessarily the goals that he was articulating.
Newsom, he said he does want Trump to rescind the National Guards. But do you see Donald Trump playing ball and working with Newsom and not wanting? These are a direct quote. Gavin Newsom basically said, you can't work with Trump, you have to work for him. So do you see that continuing? We don't see any kind of working together between the governor and the president.
Well, look, let's put politics in here. If Gavin Newsom is thinking about what does this mean for him in 2028, well, there's no upside for him to quote unquote work with the president, right? To find that. Do I think that that's politically a better place to be? If you're thinking about a general election, sure, but you've got to become leader of your party first. And I'll say this, look, I've been very skeptical of Gavin Newsom's abilities to be the Democratic nominee in 28. The idea that Democrats are going to turn to another San Francisco Democrat after Kamala Harris seems a bit far-fetched to me. But I've seen a fire in Newsom and I've seen passion in him that I've never seen before. There's always been a sense that he's manufactured, that he's a performer, right? Like Donald Trump. Um, so sometimes you never know when a moment comes uh, where a politician meets the moment and grabs that attention. Democrats are starving right now for a leader,
Yeah.
right? They are desperate for anybody to bring them water, right? This is a thirsty bunch of people because the leadership vacuum. I mean, you have the Atlantic doing this piece going, "Where's Barack Obama?" And I'm sitting there going, "My goodness, what's wrong with you, Democrats? If you've got to go 10 years in your past to look for a leader."
Do you see, I mean, because we're 6 months into the presidency at some point soon, and you would think that the Democrats would kind of start, I guess, grooming someone into the limelight, Chuck, but I don't see anyone up and coming. Do you see anyone that you could picture in that role?
No, in fact I think that it right now, if you're a well-known Democrat, I think some people view you as part of the problem,
Yeah.
right? That you've and so I think that this is a party, rank and file, that's looking for new leadership. I've said I think the most likely next leader of the Democratic Party is new and electable. And since I'm saying new, if you're going to throw names at me, that's not new, right? I mean, if you go back, we saw this after 2016. You know, Pete Buttigieg was this unknown mayor of a very small college town in Midwest America. Okay, and all of a sudden, this guy gets within a hair's breadth of actually becoming the Democratic nominee 3 years later. Yes, that speaks some to Pete Buttigieg's skill as a campaigner and as a political athlete, but I think it speaks more to a desperation in this party looking for leaders that are under the age of 80, let alone under the age of 70 or 60. And so I think that there is an opening here, but I don't see anybody right now. And if I do think the governors are among the first place I'd start looking for a leader, because you don't want anybody with Washington, D.C. ties these days.
Well, speaking of Democrats that we know, we've seen John Fetterman come out. He slammed his own party for the way that they've handled this. He said, unapologetically stand for free speech, peaceful demonstration, immigration, but this is not that. This is anarchy and true chaos. My party loses the moral high ground, and when we refuse to condemn setting cars on fire, destroying buildings, and assaulting law enforcement, we've of course seen the fact that these protests have not been completely peaceful. We have seen things happening. We saw Aussie journalists being shot with a rubber bullet. We saw cars being lit. We saw these rocks being thrown at moving cars. So how do you think the Democratic Party should have responded to these riots, Chuck?
Well, look, I think that the problem for the party is they're going to be defined by who's at the tip of the spear. And you have the mayor of Los Angeles, who is still drowning politically in her very poor response to the wildfires that wiped out a couple of communities in Los Angeles. So she's not exactly somebody that a lot of people are listening to right now. She's extraordinarily unpopular. You have a governor who may be looking more at his presidential ambition and be thinking about that first. But this is the problem Democrats have, which is Trump will do something that's obviously done to try to get a reaction. The reaction, as much as you may really feel as if it deserves the type of resistance that you believe is necessary, but it ends up playing into exactly the scenario that they're outlining, right? And I think that's what happened there. And I think that, Stephen Miller grew up in Southern California. He knows that area well. He knew where the soft spots were. He knew where there was political sensitivity. So, this is, again, I think the right sees the entire state of California as sort of a punching bag on the issue of culture in America. It's not just immigration, right? It's the entire thing. It's the tech community. It's Hollywood, right? All of California is out of touch with the rest of America. So that in many ways, it's almost they want to pick a fight culturally and say, whose side are you on?
Yeah. And I think that was made quite evident when we saw his name is Larry Elder and Caitlyn Jenner when they ran, and that was their entire messaging, that California was too left, that the businesses had been driven out and were all being placed into Texas now and all that. But an interesting theory Brian Tyler Cohen, he asked Gavin Newsom in that interview whether Trump was using California, a blue state, sanctuary city, as a way to distract the media and Americans from what's happening between him and Elon Musk. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, the thing is, it's not just him and Elon Musk. I mean, I go back, like, nothing else is going well for the president, right? The one thing, and, you see it in polling, right? The one thing the voters believe he's done well so far is secure the border. Other than that, everything else is a net negative. The economy is shaky. These tariffs are extraordinarily unpopular. His bill, there is no, I mean, his big, beautiful bill in Congress, if they pass it, I don't know what they run on, because the entire bill is built around not allowing his tax cuts to expire. So you have to somehow make the case to voters, hey, boy, it could have been worse. Never an easy thing doing that. So I just think that and obviously what's been happening overseas hasn't gone well. About the only thing that I think has gone well on the foreign policy front is how he's handled Syria. But some of that has to do with what may be simply pay to play policy when it comes to the Gulf states, right? And how much money he's personally profited off of that. So I don't know if it's a distraction from Musk or not, but I actually think part of Trump's anger at Musk is Doge has been a failure. Doge didn't do, the promise Musk made, and Trump realized, oh, this isn't going to help the deficit. This isn't going to help the numbers when we're trying to sell our tax cut. So I genuinely think Trump is angry that Musk failed in what he promised to do.
So is that the reason, is that your opinion on what led to this breakup, Chuck? It was just that in general wasn't, a personal breakup between the two. It was the fact that Doge didn't deliver what they said they were going to deliver, despite the fact that the big, beautiful bill would completely contradict everything Donald Trump said he was going to do.
Here's what I think that's how they got. I think so. Here's around Trump, there were a lot of people that didn't like Musk and wanted to see Musk go. Okay. The knives were out. Look, I just had an interview with Steve Bannon for our new platform, Newsphere, and you could just feel the venom towards Musk from him and all of his allies. I mean, they do not view, so there's and a lot of those folks work in the administration. So there were folks wanting to get Musk, and the way they got to Trump, the way they convinced Trump that, hey, you can cut Musk loose, is because Musk hasn't done what he said he was going to do. Right. And it certainly looks as if Musk wanted to do this job more to secure his government contracts and his relationships with his companies, with NASA and with the Pentagon, than he did to actually do the job. And secondly, I actually think it's because Musk didn't know what the actual facts were on the ground when it came to the government. And he made some big, bold promises based on conspiracy theories. Well, it turned out those conspiracies weren't true about government. And he couldn't find, but literally 1% of what he promised he could cut. So I think Trump was persuaded by Musk haters to cut Musk loose based on Musk not performing, even though the motivation of those Musk haters had nothing to do with Musk not performing, if you get my drift.
Do you see a world in which we see Elon Musk turning to the Democrats, whether out of retaliation, out of revenge to Donald Trump, whether that be investing money, endorsing certain people, campaigning ahead of the midterm elections?
Look, there's a reason we use the expression "follow the money," meaning you don't just follow spending. People will follow money. Oh, look, Elon Musk, money. I'm not saying some Democrats aren't going to try. Yeah. But I don't think, this is not a popular figure in either party. And I don't think the billionaire set's very popular. So I don't know, in a time when the rich are afraid to show off that they're rich, that a Democratic Party that's struggling to appeal to working class voters sidles up to a billionaire. I don't know if that's good politics for them. I think Musk is more likely to play in the third party arena, maybe play in Republican primary politics, maybe try to play a little bit in both. Say he's gonna do. I mean, about the one organization in our country that plays in both parties is AIPAC, the lobby for the government of Israel. They play in Democratic primaries, try to push back on the populist left, and they play in Republican primaries, trying to push back on the populist right. So maybe Musk tries to put himself in some sort of position like that, but I actually do think he's got to focus on his business at Tesla, or he had a very he was a few weeks away from that board getting pretty active and getting pretty angry about his leadership of that company.
It was clear that his time working in the White House was derailing him from working on his, thousands of businesses that require his every bit of attention. But just a final question, Chuck. We've seen Vladimir Putin, he launched Russia's biggest drone strike on Ukraine since the war began. Donald Trump, he's yet to even respond to this. But his 2-week deadline to Putin is actually up in 2 days. And yet we've seen really no condemnation or retaliation from the Trump administration. And it seems that we won't get that. It seems that is quite far-fetched. We obviously saw him say that he had a phone conversation with Putin, but there was no sort of condemnation about what Putin had been doing in the last few years, and just said that, look, he's going to retaliate and that's that. So do you expect the US president to stay true to his word that he will respond accordingly to Putin, that he will act differently to Putin if he doesn't use these 2 weeks to prove that he actually wants peace?
No, I don't believe he will. I mean, because past his prologue on this, right? He's never stood up to Putin. He's never gotten tough on Putin. He has let tougher sanctions take place on his watch, but he would refuse to announce it. And at times he would refuse to implement them when Congress he might sign the law, but he didn't necessarily implement them. So no, I don't. And in fact, I don't think we fully appreciate what just happened. After, when he got off the phone with Putin, he didn't say Putin shouldn't retaliate. He said Putin's going to retaliate. So we'll just have to wait and see. That was an American president essentially telling Putin, okay, go ahead and do your retaliation.
Exactly.
Go ahead. I mean, it was just, so just the fact that he essentially green-lit and stood down as Putin was going to fulfill a promise that he told him that he was going to do on the phone, I think tells you whose side he's on.
Yeah, and I just want to elaborate on that, Chuck, because I want your final thoughts on this. We've seen this bipartisan bill headed up by Lindsey Graham, this 500% tariff that would be slapped on any country importing Russian energy. It is the card to use to cripple Russia's economy, which would essentially end the war, because Putin wouldn't be able to afford the war. He wouldn't be able to afford any machinery, any artillery. He wouldn't be able to pay any of these soldiers that he's forced to work for him because they're getting paid good money. So this is the card to use. But Donald Trump has not only stalled this bill, he's reportedly asked them to water it down and asked for it not to even go to the Senate this week so they wouldn't have to pass it. So why do you think he's not using this card that the US actually has?
I don't think there's 2 ways to look at it. You can be the conspiratorial mind, and I'll set that aside. I think the other part of it is he views the world in binary terms. He thinks there's 3 spheres of influence, that Russia has one, the United States has one, and China has one. Look, I think we're more likely to see a meeting between Xi, Putin, and Trump before the end of this presidential term than we will see, him wanting to hold a G7 meeting at the White House. So look, I don't, that bill may pass, but as you just pointed out, instead of, there's a magic word called shall versus may. And if the law says the government shall, that is, you have to. If the law says the government may, that gives essentially the president the authority to do whatever the heck he wants. And that's how they want to water down the bill. Change all the shalls. If you're a grammarian out there, right? This is how it works. All the shalls to may. And that's how you water down this bill. I fully expect more. I think it's more likely they pass something to make the Russia hawks in the Senate feel like they can beat their chest. Hey, look, we passed this. Now it's up to the president to do it, and he won't do it.
Well, I guess we'll just continue to see this TACO acronym all over the headlines if that's the case. Chuck Todd, thank you so much.
Hey,
for
I hope
joining.
it's taco I'm hoping for the taco acronym with what's going on in Los Angeles.
I haven't
All right,
seen it in
I
a
really
few.
would. I hope he chickens out when it comes to the Insurrection Act.
Well, I think Gavin Newsom does as well. Chuck Todd, thank you so
Yeah.
much for joining the Trump Report.
You got it.